Well, joining us for more on this issue, we have from Washington, D.C., Patrick Theros, representative of the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem in the United States. But first, let's go to Jerusalem and speak to Dr. David Gurevich. He is a Jerusalem expert from the Hebrew University and Bar-Ilan University. David, let me ask you, this is, as we heard, a very complex issue. Perhaps there's a little right on both sides here. But did the Israel make perhaps a mistake in the way it's gone about trying to institute these changes, since it already looks like they're backtracking?
So Israel established right now today the committee that will work on this issue and the crisis, and I think that it is a step in the right direction. However, I would say that, in my opinion, Israel must dedicate a much more serious attention to the Christian affairs. We should stop regarding the representative of the churches as a local clergy, but seeing them as representative of very powerful international organizations. Sometimes they have amount of believers that can be comparable to heads of states, and in this regard we should treat them in this way. We should work with them mutually in respect, but also monitor when they do incitement against the country. And in this regard, we must always see what is going on. We should not establish committees on particular crises, but Israel should have a permanent office that will work with the churches and advance their affairs and establish a mutual respect.
Welcome back, and welcome back to our discussion on the current conflict between the Israeli government and the Jerusalem city government and some of the Christian churches in the city. We're joined by a Jerusalem expert, Dr. David Gurevich, who speaks to us from Jerusalem, and by Patrick Theros, representative of the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem in the U.S. And Patrick, I just want to go back to you. I live in Jerusalem. I have friends and neighbors that are living on land that is being sold under them by the Greek Orthodox Church. They're concerned about their future. Is there not a legitimate case to be made that the Israeli government has to deal with this issue in some way?
No, I actually do not understand the problem. The tenant is the Jewish National Fund. The Jewish National Fund has leased an extremely large tract of land called Rehavia, as the case in point, from the Patriarchate back in 1951. The fund itself then turned around and sublet that land to all the people who live on it. When you have a lease, that lease is not affected by the sale of the freehold. I mean, I actually do not understand how anyone can possibly be concerned that they would be evicted from their property. At the end of the lease, who knows? If you go and rent an apartment someplace, and you have a 5-year lease, at the end of the 5 years, you either have to renegotiate the lease or move on. That's normal. And that is the normal business practice. In this case, you have 99-year leases. At some point, the leases run out. The leases, in fact, the original lease agreement requires the church to renegotiate the property with the Jewish National Fund, and if they don't agree on fair market value, then it goes to an arbitrator. The pieces of property that were sold to the developers, all of whom are very legitimate companies, are still bound by the same lease agreement. When you buy a property that let's say you buy an apartment building. You buy that apartment building, the tenants are still governed by the lease, not by the sale of the freehold under the lease. So this was a non-issue. There was never any possibility that simply selling the property would lead to the eviction of the tenants.
Right. All right, next question for David. We've seen the same policies in place for quite a long time. Why is this all coming up now?
Well, why all this is coming up? It's a good question. Basically, I would say that we are witnessing right now a huge media crisis. It's first of all an event of public relations and much less an event of a real thing, because the lease that you mentioned is still in power until the next 30 years. So it seems that after the information about selling the land leaked, the patriarchate and the patriarch found themselves in a position that they are highly criticized by the Palestinian believers. Most of the Orthodox churches are Palestinians, while the synod, the council that controls the patriarchate in Jerusalem, are Greek. And the Palestinians accuse the patriarch in a very, I would say, unpleasant way in selling land to Jews. As you know, in Palestinian Authority, there is a capital punishment to somebody who sells land to Jews. And that's all about. When the patriarch in January arrived to Bethlehem to conduct the mass, he was met by Palestinian believers who throw eggs on him, and unfortunately the patriarch finds himself in a situation that he fights for his own position. He needs to show that he's doing something in order to stand for the Palestinian cause from one side. From the other side, we see that certain parliament members in Israel here put, I would say, provocative proposals. They know that these proposals are not going to pass in the parliament, yes. But as far as these proposals appear, unfortunately, yes, it creates a lot of public relations for them.
Okay, as we can see, a very complex issue touching on religion and politics. David Gurevich in Jerusalem and Patrick Theros in Washington, thank you for joining the Rundown.